Hello everyone, Zany Gaming coming at y'all with another video, and in today's video I want to go over the Digimon TCG tier list. So we do have EX08 and Special Booster 2.5 now in the current game, and this is a very exciting time for like Digimon players, right? Because now we are caught up with Japan, with their boxes. We're on the same page as them, so we do know some of the really good decks that have come out of Special Booster 2.5 and like what to look for in the meta. And just to make this list a little bit easier, I decided to just update my post EX08 tier list on the tierlistmaker.com. I'll leave a link to this in the description of the video, but I did just want to add in all the decks I thought were, you know, full decks that are completed with Special Booster excuse me, 2.5. And with that being down here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 10 decks, I think, that are solid, full decks that you can build from the Special Booster 2.5, all being down here. Some of these are decks, I think, that have just been updating older decks. With that being said, also newer decks, right? So you see Omnimon. This Omnimon is just standing for the DNA Digivolve Omnimon deck, the Omnimon X Anybody. This is just, you know, new red, purple Imperial Dramon. You know, Jesmon GX here, just updating Jesmon with the GX package. These are all newer decks here. And then Cool Boy just representing Royal Knights, which, you know, is definitely one of the top decks that is running over the meta in Japan right now. So I think that that deck is probably going to be one of the ones looking on the hit, even though we just got it, right? Because this hit is going to go based off of what we've already seen in Japan, and I think that we can take that information, what's going on in Japan, and almost directly involve it now in the North American meta, because we're caught up with them, right? Before, they used to have to think about these lists, maybe like, oh, well, we got to see what happens in Japan, what cards they have compared to the, you know, what the NA has, and if we ban a card there, it bans it here for us later. Now I think that it'll make making these lists for Bandai a lot easier to do now that we are caught up, right? Excuse me, I'm still trying to get over this sickness, so pardon me for all this coughing and stuff. But this is the list. You know, I'm not going to go through this too much. I will link this. I'll link a picture too so you can go through it. But we have the different tiers, outside looking in decks. Like I said, I try to bring up every possible decent deck I could in the Digimon trading card game and put this on this list for everyone to be able to use. Please use this list. Tell me what you think about the list. Like, you make your list and post them using this, and just, you know, put it in the description of the video or tag me in it, something like that. But we have the outside looking in decks down here. This is just OmniZoo. This is just a regular Nova and Machine Dramon. I'm not going to go through all these decks. You can see the images here. I'm just going to touch up on the tiers. Tier 2 are decks that need help or have gotten help recently. One deck in here, while I'm going through these, if I'm looking at anything that I think needs to be moved up, I will do that. And to be honest, I think that with the support that, you know, the Dragon Links got with the new Hina as the promo, I think that this deck is a lot better now. I do think it is a decent rogue tier deck. Just to not make it too confusing, I'm just going to add it here at the bottom of the rogue tier deck. I do think that now this deck is a cool deck that you could see maybe a random top here or there or sneak in. It is a really solid rogue tier deck. I'm not sure where to put it in the rogue tier, but I'm just putting it here, for example, to, you know, show that. With that being said, I do think that now Nature Spirits has been figured out a lot, and I think it does still need a little help, but I think that this is also a nice rogue tier deck. You have a lot of cards for Nature Spirits now that you can use to build decks with. I think people just need to figure it out a little bit more, and I'm super excited to see what people can do with Nature Spirits. Both of these decks are two of my favorite pet decks, so maybe I'm putting them up to the rogue tier a little bit premature, but I do think they're good decks. And I'll make a, you know, let me know in the comments if y'all want to see a deck profile for these two decks. They're two of my favorite decks, and I definitely like my Nature Spirits deck. This deck has been a lot stronger than I thought it would be. Going through, I still think Gallantmon needs help. Ragnarlord, still rogue tier. Beelzemon is something that I think, if people put the time and effort into Beelzemon, can be a really, really good. I'll bump it up in the rogue tier towards, you know, the middle top end kind of deck. Definitely above these, maybe around with Fortress decks, the Bees. I'll put it up here, you know, top of rogue tier. I do think that the Beelzemon Blast Mode Ace changes the way you play this deck. And now, you know, you can not have to worry about cycling through your deck too much because the Beelzemon Blast Mode Ace helps you put cards back in your deck. So I do think that this deck has gotten a nice boost with some of those cards being added into the deck. And there's a lot of different ways to build it. So I hope to see a lot more people, you know, coming in and playing Beelzemon again. Going through, this is the Red Purple Imperial Dramon, and just to update it with this one, I'll put them together. I do think that Red Purple Imperial Dramon is a tournament topper deck now. We'll put them both together. That's the same card, just depending on how you want to build the deck. But I do think Red Purple Imperial Dramon is a tournament topper deck. We're going to see a lot of people playing this deck. It's going to do really good. It's going to be a really, really strong deck. I don't think it'll be one of the best decks in the format, but I do think that it is really strong now. You have so much power with it. And I think that in general, the new, you know, Red Purple Imperial Dramon Fighter is just such a generically good, strong boss monster that you can put in a lot of red and purple decks now and just really pop off with them. It's a really strong card. Love to see the support for this deck. And I do think it's really good, but I still don't think it's as good as, you know, Blue-Green Imperial Dramon, which I do think needs a hit on the list. Trying to go through this a little bit more. You know, Gurumon and War Greymon decks, definitely Rogue Tier decks you can see top. I will say that I've been surprised at how good Nightmare Shoulders has been. It's had some recent toppings in Japan format. I know a couple people play it here in NA, and I like this deck a lot. It's one of my favorites. I do think that it's still just a Rogue Tier deck. You know, you see your pieces, you can kind of pop off. It kind of needs to stay where it's at. It's a great still Rogue Tier deck that you can play. Going through this, nothing to touch up on here. Maybe Shine Greymon could maybe be moved up a little bit higher in Rogue Tier, but we'll keep it where it's at. Just all these cards sit in Rogue Tier. Kind of just want to separate that top level as the, you know, the top Rogue Tier decks, to be honest. One that I was sleeping on Rogue Tier and is clearly a tournament topper is the Dynamon deck. This deck has been popping off in Japan, and you've seen some random tops here in NA, and I think a lot of decks have an issue that if this deck sees its lines, it can really pop off and control the board. So I do think that Dynamon moves up into a tournament topper deck. You could see probably one of these top 16, 32 in a lot of tournaments pretty consistently, to be honest. Touching on the Omnimon, the DNA Omnimon version. Let me go grab the new one here. It is also a tournament topper. You've seen it doing really, really well in some of these Asian tournaments. Seeing one make it, you know, one really good or two players making it really, really high with this deck. But I do think that this deck has a lot of variance where it's not one of the best deck in formats. But I do think that it is a great tournament topper. And you can see some of these decks are moving up to be consistent tournament topper decks because a lot of decks have really good support now. And we'll see a lot more of these decks kind of like feel out and make it a little bit more even, where there's a lot more decks you can play that are tournament toppers and a little bit still in the Rogue Tier. Moving up, Shroudmon got some support, but I think it stays there. I think that Purymon stays a good, strong Rogue deck. I think that, I'll touch this. I think the Adrastermon and gigaseadramon decks are kind of, you know, there's like 3 or 4 different ways you can build these decks. Like Fish deck, Plesiomon, Seadramon, or just straight gigaseadramon. I do think that they are both still really good, strong Rogue Tier decks that can surprise your opponent, especially the gigaseadramon. I would say that this one maybe be a little bit higher than the other ones, especially some of these decks. We'll touch on the Royal Knights. That's not going down anywhere, but we'll just put it up here around this range. It's a good, decent Rogue Tier deck. Going through this, no surprise here. Let's grab the cool boy. This Royal Knights are one of the best decks in the format. I'll put it over, you know, the Angels. A little less consistent and high rolling than some of these decks, but Royal Knights are back, baby, and they are here to stay and put in some work. You need to watch out for this deck. If you haven't played against it, the deck is so consistent now with the cool boys and the new Omekamons, and if you want to run some of the X Anybody Omnimon, you can. I think that's a little greedy, but it is a nice tech in the deck, being able to play it out. But man, this deck is so strong, so impressive. I honestly hope that something happens to this deck, because we see it topping a lot in Japan and kind of being a menace there, along with any of these decks that are best decks in format. I think all of them need some kind of touch to get hit, because some of them are really impressive. But look out for Royal Knights to put in work in your locals, in big tournaments. It's going to be one of the best decks in the format for sure. Going through some of these rows there, touched on that. I think the deck stack did get some support, and it stays there. And along with the Tyrant being a nice solid row tier deck. With that being said, before we get into the toppers and move those up or down, let's go into some of these new decks. And let's touch on the Chaosmon deck. I think this sits along the same lines as these other DNA Digivolve decks, like the Aegistramon DNA deck, the Chaosmon DNA deck, and the Millenniumon. I think they all sit in really solid rogue mid-tier decks to where, like, you know, they take some time to get going, but when you get into these really big boss monsters, you can really pop off. I will say that I do think that this one will probably be a little bit better than these two in the sense that it has some survivability with the partition. So if they ever destroy your Chaosmon Vaulter Arm, you partition out your other sections, you get both of their on-play effects that can just devastate your opponent, and it really puts your opponent in a bad spot to try to deal with this Vaulter Arm. I think I should probably put it higher than even this, maybe, because it's very consistent, and you play low. I might be, you know, capping or overzealous on this one, but I can see the Chaosmon being one of the top road decks. Like, it's doing really good. I do think Dex is going to pop up with the Death X support that we just got, the new Death X. I think it's going to be a top row tier deck. It just, maybe not a lot of people are going to play it because people aren't super excited about it. I don't see it being a really hyped deck, but the power is in this deck. There's some really, really good cards you can run in it, and the engine is super strong. You can get into this level 6 and 7 really, really easy with the option card that they have. Do not sleep on Vaulter Arm. You sleep on Vaulter Arm, and it's going to smack you in the face. It's a really good deck. Invisimon, I think it needs help. It is going to be a really cool deck, you know, bringing out bodies back to the board, but I think it needs some finish power. It has a lot of ways to be sticky and stay on the board. It has one of my favorite arts in the game. The alt art for the Invisimon is, you can't see me, so cool art. But the deck is a newer deck. It is brand new archetype to it. I think maybe people need to figure it out and try to figure out what cyborg kind of engines it needs to run, but it is a cool, fun deck that you can play and build, and, you know, maybe get a random top at your locals or something with it if they don't know what's going on. But it's an okay deck. Nothing wrong with the Invisimon. Solid deck, but just needs a little more help and support. Going into Examon, I feel like a lot of people are really, really hyped for Examon, but I'm going to put it in the same likeness of, like I said, these other DNA Digivolve decks, but I'll put it up here kind of with Vaulter Arm because I do think it has a little bit more leg and support than these two other big DNA Digivolve decks, and it's probably going to be better than Vaulter Arm. I'll put them kind of together. They're both really good rogue tier decks that you could take. I will say that if you get into the Examon, you're shutting your opponent down, and you just got to hope that they don't see their pieces, right? That's how Examon is, where it either pops off, has its pieces, controls you down, you don't get to play the game as well, or they just don't get to ever get into that if you control their board early on. I do think it is a really good, strong road tier deck that we can see popping up in the meta, and I would be really excited to see some of the people I know at our locals who have this deck maybe pick it back up and then just see the power of the deck. One thing to note on this one is that it is a blast counter Digivolve. So you do not get to just blast counter. It's a blast counter, blast DNA Digivolve. So that's one thing at our locals we had to make sure we explain to people that you don't just get the blast DNA Digivolve, you must blast DNA Digivolve on it, okay? So you can't just, you know, use it in any generic deck to blast Digivolve. It has to be a blast DNA, so you have to have the other copy in your hand to be able to go into it, but it is a super strong card regardless, and I can see it as a nice high tier rogue meta deck. And you can see a lot of these decks that came out with the support to finish out some of these decks, they're really strong, right? Good decks. This is the Ghost deck. I do think it has a little more legs to walk on than the Invisimon, but it does need some more help. But I do think that it is a cool, strong deck to where, like, you could see this pop up in a rogue tier. And I'll put it, you know, not the very bottom rogue tier, but around the bottom middle-ish. It doesn't really matter, right? It's still rogue tier. It's a cool rogue tier deck. It can do some really, really fun things. It's got a really strong busted option card. The execute mechanic is really neat. It has ways to get value back on the board. You have ways to control your opponent's board and clear their Digimon, and it's in purple, right? So purple has a lot of the best, you know, manipulate your hand, manipulate your graveyard effects, and, you know, cycle through your deck with the consistency that purple offers. So I do think that this is a cool rogue tier deck, and I think it's a more solid deck than the Invisimon. Going next into Jesmon. I don't know how to feel about Jesmon Jessamon is still a really cool deck, and I do think that the Jessamon GX helps it out a lot, but I just think that the seeing the pieces, the consistency of Jessamon, it is a middle rogue tier deck. You can still pop off, show up, and maybe, high roll your opponent with some stuff. And I do think the Jessamon GX helps a lot because you could just play this from your hand, and now it gives you a nice, awesome ace play that you can do. And, playing this Jessamon down, you get its when attacking effect to stack the Royal Knights from your sideline or your graveyard into its sources, right? So you can do some really cool stuff with this. I may be sleeping on Jessamon. I do think this card does a lot to at least put the deck into a nice rogue tier, which you can see here before. I didn't have Jessamon on the list at all, right? So I do think that this card alone and some of the other support it got does make Jessamon a really cool playable rogue tier deck now. I think you can pick your Jessamons back up and start to have a little fun playing the modern Digimon trading card game. Going into Heavy Metalldramon Ace, this one is pretty iconic with how popular it is. And, let's see. There's a couple things I feel like we need to move down here. I do think that, Bloom Lord needs some help. We've not seen any toppings for Bloom Lord, so we're going to put it down the it needs help tier deck. And the same with, Commandramon. We'll put the deck down there in needs help tier deck as well. Make a little more room just to make it a little easier. Heavy Metalldramon, rogue tier. I do think it's really good. I do think it's strong. I think it do some really cool things, but it's going to take good pilots trying to figure out the deck. But we'll put it around the same power level as the gigaseadramon. I do think it's a little more faster than gigaseadramon, but maybe doesn't offer that much control as that deck does. But really cool, strong deck, really fun. I'm excited to build it. Definitely my most excited to build deck. You finally get to have a Heavy Metalldramon deck, right? Now we have enough cards to make it a deck, and now we can see what people can do with the deck, and I'm really excited to work on it and see what I can make happen with Heavy Metalldramon. It's just such a cool art, right? He's such a cool dude. He's Heavy Metalldramon. Super cool. With that being said, this is kind of like what the bottom looks like. Outside looking in, needs help tier. A plethora of rogue tier decks that you can play in Digimon. Maybe not win your locals, but topping your locals pretty often with these decks. Are all really, really strong. They all have good legs to stand on. And then going into these tournament topper tiers, let's see if there's anything we need to move down. So we moved up the Omnimon. We do think that this is a really strong DNA Digivolve deck that you can do now. And the Omnimon here can maybe be considered into the Omni Zoo that I have down here. Maybe replaces it a little bit better. I have seen some lists come up with that. But I do think Omnimon now is really strong tournament topper deck. Along with the Dinomon, it's been popping up in Japan's format a lot, so we can assume that it does the same here. And a lot of these decks have room to grow with some of these decks on the top that we do think are going to get hit, right? I don't think that, the Deadly Sins are going anywhere. I do think that they're going to stay a tournament topper deck. For some reason, I think where this deck's entry level is kind of expensive, this deck doesn't get played a ton, but it's still a consistent, and it shows consistent tops in Japan. It shows consistent tops here. It's a strong, really cool deck. I will say that Zafagamon is finally here and really, really strong. I'm not sure if I'm confident enough to put it in the top best deck of the format, but I do think that now it does have a little more room to surpass some of these other decks because now it can also abuse the Medieval Gallantmon, right? And it has the other engine. I'll put it as one of the top, of the second tier kind of decks. With that being said, Medieval Gallantmon, this is counting as, Gallantmon. Gallantmon engine stuff. I do think that, this is the full Gallantmon, but whatever wants to run, this card alone is a tournament topper. We'll just put it here. Gallantmon, Medieval Gallantmon's its own thing. Any deck that can abuse Gallantmon can be a tournament topper. That's how strong I think the deck is. I do think that, with Medieval being so strong at the moment, that Leviamon is in a good spot still. I do think that, Armor Bunnies are really, really good. It's just not played as popular. I think that Red Hybrid and the Birds still stay at a strong tournament topper level decks. I do think that Mother decks are tournament toppers really, really strong. I think if I had any way to kind of maybe reorganize this a little bit, I feel pretty comfortable, kind of like how it looks right here, just with the consistency that some of these decks offer. And then, we'll put Mother, control stuff at the top of this tournament topper, second tier, because you have to be able to consistently beat Mother control with the medievals and stuff like that. We'll kind of just put them in the same spot, right? Because they're kind of the same stuff going on. You're playing control decks with these two cards. You got to be able to consistently beat these two decks if you want to be one of the best decks in format. And I do think that all of these decks up here can do it. So let's see if we're going to move out any of these top decks. Angels, I still think. I think we move Angels down now, right? Because there are a lot of these other decks, like, Royal Knights can deal with Angels pretty easy and not letting the Angels pop off, but Angels are still really, really fast and consistent. But I do think Angels are one of the decks that, since I brought it up, have a little bit harder of a time dealing with the Mother Shoto package kind of stuff in the deck, right? With that being said, though, I do think Vortex Warriors, I like this deck a lot. I just don't know why it doesn't get played a ton, but I would want to put this in one of the best decks of the format, because now you get to abuse Medieval Gallantmon. You have your Safagamon Ace, and this might be one of the things that get me a little more hate than normal, but I will say that Safagamon Vortex Warriors is going to be one of the best decks, because if you abuse Medieval Gallantmon and the new Safagamon Ace the right way, you can wall out a lot of your opponents and really just let them not have a lot of fun in the game. And you control their boards. You can swing over the Mothers. You can swing over all these other Digimon. And it's just really, really strong. I like this deck a lot. I think it finally got everything it needs to be one of the best decks in the format. We've already touched on the Royal Knights. They are going to be, I want to say, like top tier the best deck in the format without any hits being said. Yeah, it's definitely better than Fenrir Lugamon because it's more consistent. I don't know if it's as consistent as some of these other decks, though, but I do think it walls out Purple Hybrid, kind of. But no, Purple Hybrid clears out the bodies before you can tuck them. Mirage is just a menace. Magna's a little faster and can block out. I would say that these two are definitely around the same tier, these two down here. I am moving Fenrir Lugamon. Still one of the best decks in the format. I'll move it down a little bit, I think only because some of these other decks are a little more consistent. But you can still one turn kill your opponent with Fenrir Lugamon. It's a crazy deck. The Blue Boy's not going anywhere. Purple Hybrid's not going anywhere. Imperial Dramon's not going anywhere. And neither is Gallant. I do think that Gallantmon, Imperial, Purple Hybrid are definitely the three best decks in the format. And if I had to like separate maybe S tier, these three would be S tier. These would all be, A+ tier for sure. Definitely the best decks in the format. We got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, which is exactly where I want to be. Like I said, anywhere between like 5 to 10 best decks in format is a pretty healthy meta, because then you can pick one of these, 5 to 10 decks and do pretty well. But with that being said, I do think that the power tier of some of these decks, from Mother forward on, don't allow for a lot of other decks to do things in the game. So, I'll make another updated, ban list video. We know it's coming out soon though, right? So I don't want to really talk about it until it comes out, but I do think that these are some of the best decks in the format, and I do think that a lot of these decks need to get hit just a way, like, then, this all comes a little bit more even. These decks here and these here, and you kind of want them all to blend together a little bit more, so there's a lot more going on with it. But I do think that with all that being said, the Digimon trading card game is in a very healthy meta state right now. I do think some of the other decks at the top tier kind of skew that out of the way of these top 4 or 5 decks. But other than that, Digimon's in a good spot where there's all these different decks you can play. Now, if you're trying hard and you play one of these top 5 decks, it's not the same kind of Digimon power level, so I think those need to be hit. But Digimon is in a good spot. I know a lot of people are, saying Digimon's getting into a state where it's not fun and it's not the right thing. I disagree with that, because everyone is talking about the top tier decks and making that as a whole of Digimon, and I don't agree with that, because you can see here all these awesome decks we have to play with. But if you are just looking at a very high competitive level of play of Digimon, yes, it is only those 5 or 6 decks that you could really win with. But outside of that, you can play a lot of other decks that are really, really fun and, kind of embody what Digimon likes to do, right? But that's the video for me. Just wanted to update this video. Please don't forget to subscribe to the channel. I would really appreciate it. Leave the video a like. I'll see y'all next time. Peace.